principle, which is a bar against all information, which is proof against all argument, and which cannot fail to keep a man in everlasting ignorance. That principle is contempt prior to investigation. Good evening, my name is Hugh. I'm an alcoholic. I start off these little sermons with that quotation out of this big book of Alcoholics Anonymous for one reason and one reason only. Over the last quarter of a century, I have become convinced it is the main reason we give out a lot more of those little white chips than we do 20-year birthday cakes in Alcoholics Anonymous. Now, before I start talking, there's a few things I would like to say. If any of you are under a mistaken belief that I am Lawrence Welk and these are champagne bubbles, I want to set that straight right now. I want to thank the committee for inviting me up here, and I want to thank them for inviting Beverly up here, and I want to tell them that they got the order backwards. It is impossible for me to tell my true story with her speaking Sunday morning and still ride home in the same car with her. One other thing I don't tell you about is what it was like to drink. I don't talk about the drinking. Standing up here looking at you and watching you hug one another, it is obvious to me that most of you do not need to be told what it was like to drink. I don't do that for three reasons. Incidentally, I am not overly fond of the LAPD version of the way I drank. I never developed a fondness for the way my first wife told about the way I drank. And I don't remember how I drank, so I don't talk about it. What I do try to talk about is what I found in this way of life and in this big book of Alcoholics Anonymous. Now, to set the record straight on one thing, I want to make it very clear to start with that I was neither an atheist nor agnostic when I come into Alcoholics Anonymous. I was born and raised in southern Missouri in the Baptist Bible Belt, and there has never been a case of atheism or agnosticism in that part of the country yet. They will not tolerate it. If you're ever in southern Missouri, you'll find that there are two kinds of people back there, Baptists and heathens. And if you want to tell a difference, it's very easy. All you have to do is look at them. The heathens will be smiling. I am incidentally convinced that the Baptist Church knows about God, but I am not sure that God knows about the Baptist Church. Now, while I make fun of my church, there's one other thing I'd like to clarify. Everything they said would happen, happened almost the way they said it would. So in the end, who was the smarter of the two, me or them? In talking about this book, incidentally, and in telling you that I was neither an atheist nor an agnostic when I got here, I talk a lot about God, a power greater than myself, and a higher power, and I know some of you atheists are not going to like this. And I have been told that talking from podiums like these, in ways like that, is going to drive some of you people out of here, and I have no doubt that it will. But I am convinced that booze will drive you back, so in the end, we're going to break even. If you do not like God, power greater than yourself, or higher power, do not read this book because it is mentioned some 264 times. If you do not like Jesus Christ or the devil, don't read page 11 because both of them are mentioned on that one page. In fact, you'd better find another way to stay sober because I don't believe that this way will work until you overcome that one simple problem that you have with yourself. I would also like to welcome all you newcomers who stood and identified yourself, and those of you who didn't, and tell you, if no one has, that you're a part of a fellowship that has astounded science for a great many years. This is the largest group of people anywhere in the world who have found a way to go from adolescence to senility without ever bothering to pass through maturity. So welcome. If you feel that you are nothing because you're a drunk, it is not true. Some of the greatest figures in history were alcoholics, and they gave all the characteristics of the alcoholic. Probably one of the best known was Columbus, who when he left did not know where he was going. When he got there, he did not know where he was. When he got home, he didn't know where he had been. A woman financed the whole trip. and she was married to another fellow. So you'll find that you're in very good company. Don't look down on yourself. It isn't necessary. I come into AA in the summer of 1960 in the North Hollywood group of Alcoholics Anonymous. And when I got there, I thought it was a home for out-of-work actors. I have since found out I was right. It is a home for out-of-work actors. And being from a small town in southern Missouri, there was one thing I was fairly sure of. When you go to any strange place, the first thing you do is find out who the bully is. And you either whip him or he whips you, and from then on everything's all right. And every group in Alcoholics Anonymous has a bully. I'm not too sure who the bully is here yet, but I probably will know before the weekend is over. They're called gurus in AA. I found one of these people, and I done battle with him, and I was almost successful. Unfortunately, he died here a couple of years ago just before I had a full chance to get even, and I didn't quite make it. But I tried my very best. Now, in this way of life, there is a book for sale at most of these meetings. I don't know what your home group will tell you about this book, but I'll tell you what they tell you in my home group. That is, if you don't have the funds, if you will see the secretary or someone else, they'll see you leave with this book on your terms. I don't care if you have $1,000 in your pocket. I think you should take them up on that, because I'm convinced that it will be the last damn thing you'll ever get in Alcoholics Anonymous on your terms. You should take avail yourself of that. I got myself this fellow as what you people today call a sponsor. Back then we called them adversaries. And he didn't make that offer to me, and what he said really was, he said, I've heard a little of your story. He said, I think you're a thief. We have a book around here for sale, and I want you to buy the book, and I want to see the receipt, and if I see you with the book without a receipt, I'm going to call down and have you arrested. I thought he would, so I bought the book, showed him the receipt, and started to read this book. And I read it exactly the way you'd read a law book, looking for the loopholes. And there are a lot of loopholes in this way of life, except when to do so would injure them or others. It's a beautiful loophole. We are not saints, all-encompassing loophole. Watch the loopholes, because when you jump through them, they will unfortunately close up just before your neck clears, and you're going to be left hanging out to dry. Now, this book is probably one of the most poorly written pieces of literature that has ever been foisted on the American public, and especially a recovering drunk. There is no centerfold, no pictures, no charts, no graphs, no nothing, just a bunch of words, and you are not going to like those words if you're like I was when I got here. There are words like absolutely, precisely, and exactly that leave no room at all for the fertile imagination of an alcoholic to wander around in. And you will find when you read these books, you read it, you tell somebody what you read, you'll go back and read it, and someone has changed about 5 words. And that will happen for the rest of your life in this way of life, I understand. It has certainly happened to me that way. But I started to read this book. I didn't understand it. I couldn't comprehend it. Alcoholics Anonymous is totally backwards from any other way of life you have ever lived. I spent some time in the Marine Corps, and not one time did I ever hear surrender to win. I was in business for 10 years down south, and never once did I hear anyone say, you keep it by giving it away. You put it in your pocket, put your hand in your pocket, and get out the hell out of town, but you don't give nobody nothing. And you will find that if candles are on a cake, and there are a great many of them, and someone lights those candles, no matter how long they have been in AA, they will always light the outside first and burn the hell out of their hands trying to light the inside last. So this is a backwards way of life, to any way of life you've ever learned, and that will be the greatest obstacle you'll have to overcome in the beginning anyway. I made the mistake once of going to this man and asking him if he'd mind explaining to me what was in this book, and he said, no, of course not, I'll be glad to. Now, he had conditions with every one about anything he ever done, and I'm sure that he died on his terms, not on God's. And one of the conditions he made with me was that if I tell him it was what was on the first page of this book, he would tell me what was on all the rest of the pages. And that seemed like a simple enough task for a man of my ability, so I memorized what I thought was the first page in the book of Alcoholics Anonymous. And I thought it was a page that said, we of Alcoholics Anonymous are more than 100 men and women who have recovered from a seemingly hopeless state of mind and body. And I got that down pat. I went up to him, repeated it. He said, that's not it. I said, it is too. He said, it is not. I went home, read it. It was, went back, told him so, and he said, my young friend, that is not the first page in the book of Alcoholics Anonymous. I memorized every page from there forward in this book. The table of contents gave me a hell of a start, some of them, but I got them memorized. Every time I'd repeat what I had memorized, he'd say, that's not it. Finally, one day, about 3 months later, I ran across the pages of Alcoholics Anonymous, and I thought I got it. I went up to him and I said, Alcoholics Anonymous. He said, what's the matter with you? You crazy? And I said, no, sir, I am not. You told me that if I told you what was on the first page of this book, you would tell me what was on all the rest of the pages. And he said, that I will, my young friend, but you have not. And with that, he walked over to a table and he picked up a book like this. And he said, this is the first page in the book of Alcoholics Anonymous. And there is absolutely nothing on the first page. And if it has taken you 3 months to learn about a page with nothing on it, how long do you think it's going to take to learn about a page with all the printing on it? And once again, he'd made a fool out of me. That page was white in that book. And then he said something I have not forgotten. He said, that's the last time the white should ever bother you. From now on, just read the black. It will make more sense. When I'd been sober about 3 years, I got my first client in Alcoholics Anonymous. That was a drunken woman no one else wanted anything to do with, and I was bound and determined she would get mentally healthy or I was going to kill her. To the best of my knowledge, and that was some 22 years ago now, Marion has not had a drink from that day to this. And then I made the second of 2 mistakes. I subsequently memorized one hell of a lot of this book. And I got so I could quote it, chapter, page, verse, tell you what the founders meant by it, exactly how you should apply it to your life, and exactly what you should do. And then I learned, when you memorize anything, you limit your understanding to your own intellect and intelligence, and your mind closes like a steel trap. And then when Marion got sober, others came and they did what I told them to, when I told them to, and how I told them to, and they did not drink. And I took the credit for their sobriety. When I'd been sober about 7 years, I looked around me and my life was perfect. Every promise in this book, and there's a damn sight more than just those on page 83 and 84, incidentally, had been fulfilled. I was living in a new home. I was back with a family that had abandoned me. I was driving a new car, had money in the bank, these things called self-respect, and I was even liked by a few people in AA, and I was well known, and I had become a big shot in Alcoholics Anonymous. Now, if you want to be a big shot in AA, what you will find is absolutely essential in your life is an AA girlfriend. So I looked over the current crop of newcomers, and if one of these young ladies comes by, you will know God sent her to you. Well, I'm not too sure today which side sent her, but she did come by. And now my life was absolutely perfect, except for one thing. I had a wife and a girlfriend, the wrong one was pregnant. Now, it must be obvious to the newest member in this group here tonight that I was not practicing these principles in all of my affairs. And I found that I was no longer carrying a spiritual message to anyone. One of wisdom? No. Intelligence? Maybe. Intellect? Perhaps, but not spiritual. And at the time I was rather convinced that G.O.D. was an abbreviation for good old Doug. So I talked to myself a lot. Unfortunately, I began to listen to some of the answers. And if I was wrong, I would promptly admit it in a year or two anyway. And without knowing what I was doing, I was walking backwards through every step in Alcoholics Anonymous. You don't have to be too bright to know that the steps that led up to this podium will lead down, depending on how you are looking. This program is so effective that it took 2 years for me to be exactly where I was the day I got here, and my life was totally and completely unmanageable, and I had not had a drink of alcohol. And then, just before my 9th birthday, I did the one thing no alcoholic should ever do. I took a drink of alcohol, and in 2 weeks I was drinking as bad as I had ever drank. And some more time went by, and it was far worse. And I didn't know what to do. You see, something happened this time that had never happened before. The alcohol simply did not work. While physically I was as drunk as I have ever been, mentally I was as sober as I am right now. There must be something worse than a head full of A and a belly full of booze, but I don't know what it is, and I don't want to find out, not on this planet anyway. But I stood at that turning point, and it was either come back to Alcoholics Anonymous or go out in the desert as my brother had done some 15 years before and blow my brains out. Regardless, of what some of the people in my home group may tell you, I did not blow my brains out. I came back to Alcoholics Anonymous, and when they would ask for the hands of newcomers, I would hold my hand up and my head down. The first time, I knew what pitiful and incomprehensible demoralization was, but this time, I knew what pitiful and incomprehensible humiliation was, and I was humiliated and I was embarrassed. And everyone whose inventory I had so eloquently taken now took mine, and I could do absolutely nothing but sit and listen. They were not kind, considerate, benevolent. They were honest, and for that today I am extremely grateful. I have gotten even with all of them but two, and I'm still looking for them. Now that was some 16 years ago. I have proven you can come back. What I have not proven is why you should ever leave. I'm sitting in a North Hollywood clubhouse one day not too long after this, and I'm talking to a friend of mine about all I had given to this girl, who I subsequently married, incidentally. And I said, I have given her everything, and before I go any further, I want to make one thing clear. It was not Beverly. She gets awfully upset when people think that was her. This was another one, so I don't want her upset this weekend at all. I said, I have given her everything. Everything a man can give to a woman, I have given her everything. This adversary of mine walked over, looked down at me, and he said, my young friend, you have given her everything, but up. And with that, he walked away, and I turned to this friend of mine, and I said, what do you mean by that? And he said, half measures avail us nothing. All the way or no way. I didn't know what to do. In my youth, I had studied enough religion to have joined the ministry if I'd have chosen to. I could quote this book from memory, and still, I'm coming off a drunk. And I didn't know what to do. I had an idea it had something to do with this book, but I wasn't sure exactly what. But I decided to try to find. Now I'm going to tell you what I found this time that I didn't find the first time. I started to reread this book, and when I did, I started at the very beginning this time, instead of in the middle going both ways. And I tried to do it with an open mind now, to try to understand what I had or had not done, what should or should not have been. And when I read the doctor's opinion, I got something out of it I never got before. Men and women drink essentially for the effect. And while this effect is so injurious, it is so elusive that we soon cannot differentiate between the true and the false. And we become convinced that our alcoholic life is the only way of life. And if you are convinced that your way of life is the only way of life, you will do absolutely nothing to change it. You will be absolutely convinced that the problems you are having is their fault, her fault, or his, or something else. But my God, not mine. I'm living the only way of life that anyone should live. And then Sophie said that we're restless, irritable, and discontent unless we can take that drink which we see others taking with impunity. It does not bother them at all. But for us, something happens that does not happen in the ordinary heavy drinker. The phenomena of craving develops, and we are often running on another spree, and that this will happen over and over and over, until and unless we have some kind of a complete psychic change. Something has to take place. AA produces this artificially or instantaneously, depending on your luck of the draw and your bullheaded determination to prove how right you really are. The balance of this book, incidentally, is written about the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous. That is through chapter 7, and I think I can prove that to you. Chapters 2 and 3 are written only about step 1. I thought step 1 said to admit you're an alcoholic. I would do that on the wet end of a bar. You know the word I missed? Powerless. I wouldn't admit I was powerless over anything or anyone. Do you know why your life is unmanageable? You know what they tell you in here? The great obsession of every abnormal drinker is the idea that somehow, someday, you can control and enjoy your drinking. Do you know the great obsession that causes all abnormality? Ask an Al-Anon, and they'll tell you it is the idea that you can control and enjoy anything or anyone. It cannot be. Now, when you read chapter 4 in this book, you will find that it is only about step 2. And the first paragraph is extremely important. It says, in the preceding chapters you have learned something about alcoholism. We hope we have made clear the distinction between the alcoholic and the non-alcoholic. And they're not talking now about the drinker and the non-drinker. But why can one person drink heavily and the other one can't? without this disastrous result, that phenomena of craving all over again. And then they list the only two symptoms that are listed anywhere in this book for alcoholism, and there are only two. It's as if when you honestly want to, you find you cannot quit entirely, or if when you're drinking you have little control over how much you take, you are probably alcoholic. If this be the case, you may be suffering from an illness which only a spiritual experience will conquer. If that's true, would you now tell me why so many people spend so much time trying to get emotionally well and have so little to do with the spiritual way of life? Still think you can do it yourself? I guess we all do from time to time. I was told when I got here that I either came for relief or recovery. It was up to me. Now, on page 52 in that one chapter about the second step, you will find 8 results of being either an atheist, agnostic, or egoist. And I'm not going to tell you what they are. I had to buy this book and read them so you can get your own damn book and read them. I'm going to tell you what 2 of them are. One of them says we could not control our emotional natures. One of them says we were having trouble in our personal relationships. Do you know where else relationships is mentioned in this book? Graphically, in chapter 11. When it says, see to it that your relationship with him is right, and great events will come to pass for you and countless others. Now, fellows, is it possible that these relationships that ended up so disastrously for us started out with what's in it for me and absolutely no consideration of anybody else? Perhaps. Were these things all material with no thought for a life that we had intruded upon? Perhaps it was. I didn't catch step 2 too well. You know, I thought it said we came to believe in a power greater than ourselves. And I missed the word that. We came to believe that, a power greater than ourselves. If you new people believe that anyone in this room can help you, they can help you. Your faith will do it. Christ said to a woman once who tried to touch the hem of his garment to be cured from a very serious illness, you don't need to do that. You are cured. Your faith has made you whole. You believed it could be, and it was. We came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity. But you know how many of us try to become a power greater than ourselves and fall flat of our face? How many? Now, the next chapter is entitled, How It Works. Did you ever ask an old-timer how it works, and he says, trust God and clean house? You know where he got it? Over in chapter 7, it says, burn the idea into the consciousness of every man that he too can get well, regardless of anyone. The only condition being that he trust in God and clean house. That's trust in God and clean house, not trust in God and playhouse, incidentally. Now, you will find what I did. I said I was an egoist. Do you know what an egoist is? It is a person that while he knows all about God, he believes only in himself. And if he believes only in himself, he will think only of himself. And it isn't long before he's living his life as if he was in a room full of mirrors, and every human feeling that goes out is reflected right back. So if he feels any kind of pity, it's self-pity. If he feels any kind of regret, it's self-regret. If he feels love, he's liable to screw himself right out of the organization. What about chapter 5? How it works. You heard this young man Roy read that. Did you really hear what he read? You know, chapter 5, that small portion that we read in Southern California now, is being read all over this country. It's being read in Maine and Virginia, in Missouri and Florida. They read it in Montreal at every meeting. Now, they don't know why the hell they're reading it, but they're reading it, and that's an improvement. We've sent enough missionaries out to the heathens, so we've got them to thinking our way anyway. But do you know what he said? One of the most misquoted statements that I have heard in AA is something that you hear every day. It says in here, you can work this program any way you want to, but you know what the book says? Rarely have we seen a person fail who has thoroughly followed our path. No S on path at all. It is true that you can follow at your own pace. It's equally true that you better make damn sure it's this path you're following. It says there's 2 kinds of people who ain't going to make it. Those who cannot or will not completely give themselves to this simple program. There they're talking about the smart ass and the wet brain. So the next time one of you have a little drinky poo, or you fire off some of them pocket rockets some of you carry around with you, and you're sitting out here on one of these street corners trying to figure out which one you are, I want to tell you right now, a wet brain can't think. You'll know which one you are, I just told you. There are three conditions. One of the most misquoted statements of all is the one that says, if you want what we have. This book does not say that. That is the philosophy of a thief, and it is not a part of the AA way of life. What it does say is, if you have decided you want what we have and are willing to go to any length to get it, then you're ready to take certain steps. Have you made that decision? Do you want it? Are you willing to go to any length to get it? If not, you're not going to get it. It's that simple. What you will get is a whole bunch of these little Technicolor buttons to wear on your keychain. You may get a cake or two with a candle on it, but what you will not get is long-term sobriety, peace of mind, contentment, hope, or any of the rest of the things that makes life worth living, drunk or sober. They will simply be elusive. Christ had 12 disciples. Alcoholics Anonymous has 12 steps. At some of these we balked. One of Christ's disciples was Judas. One of these steps is Judas. Do you know which one it is? It's the one step you're absolutely convinced does not apply to you. The one step you're absolutely sure you don't have to take. That's the Judas step in this way of life. Now, right after the ABCs, where we stop reading, you'll see a remarkable thing happens in this book. It says, being convinced we were at step 3, and step 3 is italicized. That's all we've came to so far, and we've read almost half the book. And every step from now on is italicized in order in this book as they are written. So you'll have no trouble finding them when you do. A little further over in that same chapter, it says this is step 4, how it works. Step 3 and 4, trust God, clean house. Simple. It only took me 22 years to learn that. Very simple. Now, when you get into step 4, you're going to run across a word that most of you have heard and maybe you haven't understood. That's called a resentment. Do you know what a resentment is? A resentment is the courage of a coward. And you get that resentment because someone does, or you think someone does, something that was derogatory to you, and you'll do absolutely nothing but think. And the more you think, the worse it gets. And it isn't long before you're hating that SOB with a purple passion. And you're about to die while he's still out there enjoying life. Now, when I got up that far in this book, and I purposely skipped over step 3 for a moment, but I'm going to get back to it. When I got up that far in this book, this adversary of mine came over to me one day and he said, you've been freeloading on us long enough, it's time you took an inventory. So I took an inventory. I wrote it out in longhand, edited it for proper readability, seen the syntax was right, punctuated it properly, put it in a soft, loose leaf folder, added this little addendum about a resentment list, and presented it to him. And he said, what the hell is this, a movie script? I said, no, sir, that's my inventory. He said, it is not your inventory. He said, I'm an actor. I know a movie script when I see one. He said, I don't even want to read it. I said, sir, that is my inventory. He said, it is not your inventory. He said, what that is a list of your behavioral patterns, and I have no doubt that you have edited them so well that we will never discover what's wrong with you. With that, he reached in his inside pocket, took out a little notebook, tore one leaf out, handed it to me. He said, take your inventory on this. I said, I cannot. He said, you can. I said, it is impossible. He said, it is not. He said, did you ever take anything that did not belong to you? I said, of course, you know I have. Then he said, write down thief. He said, did you ever tell a little fib that you knew was a little fib? I said, of course, you know I have. Then he said, write down liar. Now, I did not like the way this inventory was starting to turn out. He said, have you ever played with the girls? And I said, you know I have. Then he said, write down cheat. And when he was walking away, he turned around and he said, oh, incidentally, at the very top, he said, write down atheist. I said, I told you I was a Baptist. He said, what's the difference? But because he said that, I have come to understand that quite often a deep-seated religious conviction is the greatest obstacle you have to overcome to a spiritual way of life, as odd as that may sound. I've got a couple of Catholic priests. One of them happens to be a Monsignor in my little collection of freaks. And the most difficult step they have is step 2. I told the one here the other day, I said, your only chance is to hope you can make it all the way through the hierarchy, become the Pope, and not worry about these things from then on. You can drink yourself to death with your attitude. Now, we, of course, got together and discussed how all of these things had affected my life, and I learned something I could not have learned any other way. Every one of us have character traits. Those character traits in combination are our personality. If we use a character trait selfishly, that character trait will become defective. If we use that same trait unselfishly, it does not become defective. Do you know that identically the same trait of a short story writer like Mark Twain and O. Henry and Poe is identically the same character trait of a pathological liar? There's no difference, except I used mine to get out of trouble, and they used theirs unselfishly to help and amuse the world. The difference was astounding. I seen how that lying was a big problem with me. I didn't like to lie. And then I ran across another quaint little fact. Stealing didn't bother me. I went up to him and told him one day, I said, stealing don't bother me. He said, why should it? I said, because it's not right. He said, who said it wasn't? I said, I said it wasn't. He said, then don't steal. And I said, but I like to steal. He said, you like to lie? And I said, no, I don't. He said, how are you going to do one without the other? And I couldn't figure that one out. I quit stealing, obviously, openly. But most of the things I've told you so far, I have stolen from someone or from this book. And I have weaved them together in a tale I hope will help you to understand what I have found. So have I really changed my character traits, or have I just had the defective parts removed? Ask yourself. We are not out to make one another conform to the morals of society. We are out to find the obstacles to our own sobriety and what they are. Now, the main reason I skipped over God was because of something that I think is important. You remember what I said about a resentment? In Shakespeare, in Julius Caesar, when he is telling his wife Calpurnia about his plans, she says, beware, Caesar, beware. And he says something I think is most eloquent. He says, a coward dies many times before his death. The valiant never taste of death but once. How many times do you want to die? Do you want to get these resentments periodically, these things which have the power to actually kill, real or imagined? Or do you want to become valiant and face life on life's term? You know what our serenity prayer says, and this is where it's going to stick in some of you atheists' throat. It says, God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change. Have you ever tried to correct a situation that emotionally disturbed the devil out of you with those same disturbed emotions, and it got worse and worse and worse? Where else would I get serenity? Where else would it come from? From me? Impossible. A friend of mine, now he don't know he's a friend of mine, but he once said of myself, I am nothing. I can do nothing. I am the same person who came here 25 years ago. My understanding of this way of life is broader. My sobriety is more enjoyable. But have I really changed that much? I think not. I've only changed within my ability to change because of a loving God that I've come to understand in this way of life, and people like you in meetings like this. If you come into Alcoholics Anonymous and obtain and maintain your sobriety over any period of time, you will become a leader whether you want to or not. But who leads you? Without that third step, you may become a Judas goat instead of a shepherd. It's just that simple. The next chapter is entitled Into Action. It is not entitled Into Thinking. It's a very good reason for that. Each one of us in our ways have proven one thing, and one thing beyond all reasonable doubt. We could never think ourselves into good living, but each one of us can live ourselves into good thinking. And it's action that does it. It isn't changing your mind. You may still have some fantastic thoughts about some of these young ladies around here, but you will not get in trouble if you don't act on those thoughts. So it's the action now that becomes important. In Alcoholics Anonymous, we deal in quantity, not quality. Thank God for that. But in that one chapter, every step, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10, are all itemized and italicized in order in one chapter. And they close that chapter by saying, we will now devote the next chapter entirely to the 12th step, working with others, and they do, and so far that's the basic text of this book up to that point. And that's as far as I read for a long time. When I come back into Alcoholics Anonymous, I did not have a wife, and I did not want a wife. And I know that some of you young fellows out there are thinking the same thing. Well, let me tell you something. If you come into AA, you're going to get a wife whether you want one or not. If you're lucky, she'll be in AA, and if you're not, she'll be in Al-Anon, but either way, you're going to get one. So I would advise you to read the chapter to the wives. If I had not read that chapter, incidentally, I want to tell you something. There are 4 types of alcoholics I would not have known about that are graphically described in that chapter. There are 5 types in a doctor's opinion, and 1 more type in a basic text. Now, that's 10 types of alcoholics that were known in 1939 when this book was published. If that is not enough to get you over your bigotry that says, if you didn't drink like I drank, you're not an alcoholic, I don't know what would be. You know what Soper said about that? He said, these types and many others have one thing in common. When they start to drink, the phenomena of craving develops. One thing in common. What about family after? You don't have a family and you don't want one of those either, huh? Well, I got news for you again, young men. You are not going to find a 40-year-old virgin orphan in AA or Al-Anon either, for that matter. So you're going to get a family whether you want one or not. I happen to have 3 daughters. Beverly's got 1. That's 4 daughters. I would much prefer to raise saber-toothed tigers than daughters, but we got 4 of them. And we get along remarkably well together because we don't see one another very often. But there's something else I would not have known if I had not have read that chapter. Do you know it's okay to live in a good home, drive a good car, have money in the bank, wear good clothes? It says the material is all right as long as it always follows the spiritual, but never precedes it. First things first. And yet there's not one word in this book that says you have to live in a better home, drive a better car, wear better clothes, have more money, or anything else. The book itself, the message, is spiritual. The book is material. It's up to you. It just gives you the procedure that you should follow. What about the employer? I recently quit a job, or the job ended, really. I didn't really quit it. And I did not work for 15 months. I was very contented this way. Beverly was aggravated, but I was contented. I have never in my life worked for money. That has never been a motive for me to work. Poverty is a motive for me to work. I was able to successfully conclude a job that is not yet over yesterday, so I would be free to enjoy what is this weekend has in store for me. And I feel absolutely good about it, and I do not intend to ask Beverly how she feels, nor do I intend to listen if she tries to tell me. But there's something else I would not have learned if I had not have read that chapter. Do you know what the 5 greatest enemies of the alcoholic are? Resentment, jealousy, envy, frustration, and fear. And you will encounter each and every one of these every day you work, I don't care where or for whom. You will resent anyone who does not take your sensitive nature into consideration when they're telling you to do something. You will be jealous of anyone who has more authority in the firm than you have. You will envy the idiot who owns the store when it is obvious that you have more brains than he'll ever have. You will become frustrated when you try to put a nut on and it will not go, or add a column of figures 3 times and get 3 different answers. With things like that going for you, you're going to be afraid they're going to fire your ass, and you're probably right. They probably will. But I would not have known these things if I had not have read that chapter. And it deals with something I think is very important, and that's the word fear. Alcoholics Anonymous has a way of eliminating this thing we call fear, but it does not eliminate fear. What it does is eliminate the causes. There are 5 fundamental causes of fear. The most common cause to all of us is we are afraid that we will be embarrassed. Embarrassment. So we do not take an active participation in our own recovery. It is true, I'm going to tell you right now, when you start talking, you will become embarrassed. I said once that I have done everything a man can do except make love to another man. A guy in a meeting said, if you had as many blackouts as you say you had, how do you know you didn't? But I overcome embarrassment by participating in my own recovery. Another great cause, and one that you women have so much trouble with, is called loneliness. You have gotten yourself into situations you wouldn't have considered getting into for any other reason. You were just lonely. Doesn't the fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous offset that loneliness somewhat? Doesn't it make it bearable and tolerable until someone does come along that you do have something in common with and you can wait now? And it is not as much of a problem as you thought it was. So this fellowship begins to work that way. Another great cause of this is retribution. We run scared to death that somebody's going to do to us what we've already done to someone else. But what about steps 8 and 9? Don't they handle this? Doesn't it take it away when you go to someone and say, I've done something that I'm not proud of and I'd like to set it right? I don't know what I can do, but here's what I've done. Maybe you can do nothing. But with that step, or those 2 steps, what you will have done is eliminate retribution. You will no longer fear someone doing to you what you have done to someone else. Somebody said, everything you people own is in Beverly's name and yours. What if she takes it and leaves? I said, well, I'd be very interested to see who picks me up when she throws me away. It may happen, but it may not. I have had feelings both ways, and I'm sure she has. What about the fear of death? A great common fear to so many of us. I'm 60 years old. How many years do I have left? Is the years important? Alcoholics Anonymous told me a day at a time. I am here tonight with you sober. What more could a drunk like me conceivably want? And the fear of death disappeared. I did not say that I now courted it or wanted it, but it just seemed to have leave when I started living my life for today, to do the best I could do today without becoming complacent in doing it. The last one, of course, is the greatest of all. That is fear itself, that unreasoning, unfounded, ungrounded, horrible fear that we seem to go through for no known reason whatever. And yet there probably is a very simple reason behind it. Each one different, each one more difficult to understand. After where I've been, what do I have to fear from where I am? As Mr. Roosevelt said, the only thing we ever need to fear is fear itself, and that's the reason for fear. So that's the only thing we're ever afraid of. I haven't told you about chapter 11 yet, but I read it one day by accident. I opened a book, and I thought, well, hell, I hear it read in all the meetings, why bother reading it? But I opened it up and I read it. And in the very beginning, they told my story. We drink because we like the friendship, the warmth, the conviviality, the freedom from boredom, worry, and cares that we found in a bar. Now, I don't know about you, but I like Saturday night, New Year's Eve, and bright lights and blonde-haired women and piano bars and nylon hose. And if you didn't, incidentally, I think you missed a hell of a lot in your drinking. But then they said the old pleasures were gone. And we could never recapture the glorious moments of the past. Each time we tried, we were met with one more defeat, one more failure. Let go. Absolutely. And then I read the rest of it. And I got to the part I heard read and found the problem. Our book is meant to be suggestive only. We realize we know only a little. When you know everything this book has to teach you, you may not know enough to stay away from a drink. Okay, atheists, here it comes. God will constantly disclose more to you and to us, and then it tells you the exact pattern to follow. What did it disclose? Tell you a couple of things he disclosed to me. One of them had to do with the word spiritual. I thought I knew what spiritual was. Several years ago, and Bev and I have been married 14 years Wednesday, and she's been very happy. We did not know exactly what the future held for either one of us, and we had come to a parting of the ways. And I went to the late night meeting at the L&S Club one night when it was an AA group, and I got there, and about 10 minutes after I got there, I started feeling this anxiety, this unfounded fear, this ungrounded fear that comes up, and the anxiety was oppressive after a few minutes. And a friend of mine came in, and I asked him, I said, would you mind taking a meeting over for me? I got to go home. And he said, no, of course not. I'll be glad to. He said, my God, you're white as a ghost. He said, what can I do? Can I help you? And I said, no, I've got to go home. I don't know why, but I just got to go, so I left. And I felt really that when I got home, the phone would be ringing and somebody would be telling me one of my daughters had been killed. It was just that kind of a feeling. But when I got home, I walked in my apartment and the phone was not ringing, and I walked over to the end table and I picked up a Bible. And I opened it up, coincidentally, no doubt, to a chapter and a verse in Isaiah. And I read what it said. And it said, behold, I have refined thee, but not as silver. I have chosen thee in the furnace of affliction. And the feeling went away, and for the last 14 years I have not known one moment of anxiety. Concern, worry, normal things, yes, but not one bit of anxiety. I went back to the meeting that night. The meeting was successful, and as I say, Bev and I have been married for 14 years. That turned out all right. I went home and I opened that Bible up several times, and it never opened to the same place twice. Oh, to Isaiah a few times. It happens to be the middle book of the Bible. And I read the whole book before I found it, and there it was in the 48th chapter and the 10th verse. And then I read verse 11. You know what it said? I will share my glory with no one. And from that day to this, I have not taken a credit for anyone's sobriety. That's up to you and God as you understand God. It is not up to you and I, regardless of who you may be. I thought this was spiritual. Perhaps it was. Coincidental, religious, I don't know. I can't explain it. But every time I tell that story, one name would run over and over in my mind, and that name was Johnny. Johnny was the caretaker of the North Hollywood group when I came in. And I had nothing. I was sleeping behind the fence. But every night, Johnny would come out there and say, come on in, they're all gone, we can sit and talk. I tell him, go to hell. He'd say, come on in, we can talk, they're all gone. I said, Johnny, go to hell, I know what I'm doing, leave me alone. But he wouldn't leave me alone. From sometime in July until the 21st of December, I said no. On the 21st of December, 1960, I did walk in. And Johnny and I talked all night. And I had only the clothes I had on my back, and somewhere Johnny got an old gray suit. It didn't fit, and it certainly never cost as much as this. And he got me a white shirt, brand new, and a brand new pair of white socks, and he gave them to me. Now, Johnny was spiritual. You see, when one man does for another what that man cannot do for himself, the man who does that is spiritual. He has learned the true meaning of this way of life. And Johnny had spent 27 of his 47 years in various penal institutions from Missouri to California. God does not care where you have been, only what you can do for someone else. Johnny cared. That was spiritual. One other word that for a great many years I puzzled the word out, and I have heard that word since I was a small boy. These revelations do come through. Some years ago there was a song that was very popular. It was, is this all there is? No, it is not. Unless you are willing to abandon God as you understand God, and then what you've got is all you've got. I couldn't understand the word love. I knew about desire, passion, romance, love. I didn't know anything about it. I knew about concern even, but not love. And then one day I discovered something by accident when I was driving home from work. Love is not an emotion. It is an action. But for every action you take, a certain set of your emotions will come into play. And if you look closely at your emotions, you will find they do only one of two things. They either reward or punish, depending on whether what you're doing is right or wrong. And if you're feeling guilt, shame, remorse, regret, it's wrong. What you're doing or who you're doing it with is not right. If you feel hope, contentment, serenity, peace of mind, it is all right. So your emotions are important, but so are your actions. And then I begin to understand that words contain parts. I found 4 qualities in love. The first quality I found was a quality called transparency. To become transparent, to let other people see in so you can see out. And those mirrors had now started to become windows. And I could feel a genuine sorrow for someone else when they did not like me. That is totally alien to my way of thinking, but there it was. And each human emotion now can go past to the person it should go to. And you can feel genuine sorrow, genuine concern, genuine anything for anyone else without being emotionally involved in it in any way. Transparency. Isn't that what we tell people in step 5? Tell all of your story to someone so someone knows all about you. What is so damnable important about your vulnerability that you can't be hurt? My God, haven't we hurt enough people? And if someone is going to hurt you, shouldn't they do it soon so you'll know about it and can get over it quicker? But you'll find they will not do this. As they can see in and you can see out, your instinct now begins to work instead of your imagination. The second quality that I learned was a quality I learned from Gabron and Al-Anon. It's called apartness. Let there be an apartness in our togetherness. Al-Anon says it a little differently, and they say, release with love. I'm just not going to get close enough where you can hit me no more, Buster. I'm going to put a little distance between us. But between us, it's very important. How many times have our children left, or we had to leave, or we get out of a situation because someone held us so close they smothered us and we could not breathe? Have you ever been up in the redwoods? And you look at those redwood trees and they're absolutely beautiful, and some of them are 400 or 500 feet high. One of them in particular I know was 1,500 years old when Christ was born. So they seemingly live forever, and yet underneath them very little grows. The sunlight of the Spirit cannot come through. You cannot grow spiritually in the shadow of anyone, lover, wife, sponsor, friend. You can grow spiritually only in the light of God. There is no other way. The sunlight of the Spirit just has to come through. The third quality that I learned about love was one I never associated with love because I never understood the quality. It's called freedom. I mean, to me, a kiss is a contract. I never associated freedom with love. I didn't know what freedom was. I thought freedom was doing what I wanted to do when I wanted to do it. And then I heard a song that said that kind of freedom is just another word for nothing left to lose. No. Freedom is not doing what you want to do. Freedom is the power to do what you have to do when it needs to be done. And for the first time in my life, I was free from the bondage of self, which is the only bondage any alcoholic was ever under anyway, as far as I'm concerned. The fourth quality was one I am convinced, as others before me were, that if we had all the alcoholics in the world in one room, we'd have less than 2% of the world's patients. And yet without this quality of patience, how in the name of heaven can you wait for a moronic little idiot like that to finally begin to hear what you have been telling him for the last 2 or 3 years? How could you possibly put up with these idiotic people who call you at 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning telling you they have a little trouble in their relationship, which you told them to stay the hell out of anyway? Without patience, how could I wait for my youngest daughter to become convinced that better living through chemistry is not the right way? And now I can understand how my mother and the rest of my family felt when I was doing to them and to myself what my daughter is doing to me and to herself. And I will not interfere. I will not bother her. The most difficult lesson any alcoholic has to learn is when you cannot do anything, don't do anything. Doing nothing is an inconceivable theorem to an alcoholic. He will fix anything, anytime, whether there's anything wrong with it or not. But do nothing. If I do nothing, there is a possibility someday she may say, Dad, I need some help. If I interfere, there is an even greater possibility that I will drive her away. We are too close. It would not work. I have to admit that a stranger has power that I do not have in my own family. I have to admit that Christ once again was right when he said a prophet is without merit in his own country. If you have an aversion to the Bible, and I'm sure that many of you do, try reading it sometime with an open mind. It would not bother anyone to hear the statement, to walk like you talk. You would think this was a very good AA statement, and it is. But do you know where it came from? In the 10th chapter and the 37th verse of John, Christ said, if I do not my Father's work, believe not what I say. Walk like you talk. It's really a good book. It really may not add up to this, but it's a good book, just the same. Now, I want to close by telling you about step 12. Having had a spiritual awakening as a result of these steps, we try to carry this message to alcoholics and to practice these principles in all of our affairs. I think I can do this best very shortly with a little story. Some few thousand years ago, when God had a message he wanted carried on the face of this earth, he looked around to see what group of people could carry it best. In the Middle East, he found a group of people, a little tribe of people, and he gave them the commandment to carry the message of one God throughout the world. It was a tribe of Israel. They have carried this message in spite of all the shame, humiliation, and degradation that could be heaped upon their shoulders. They have carried this message in spite of anything that could be possibly done to them. Until today, there are only two major religions who do not subscribe to the one God theory, and they're going to come around. I won't live to see it, but they'll come around. Now, where are the gods of the Egyptians? What were their names? What about the gods of the Greeks and the Roman household gods? Do you remember any of them? No, they're gone now. All because of this hard-headed, self-willed, egocentric group of people who, when they were given a commandment, followed that commandment to the letter, in spite of anything. Some thousands of years later, a man come on this earth who gave us a spiritual message. And the churches for 100 years, when they didn't really exist as churches, carried this first century Christianity quite well. And then tenets and subdivisions began to be formed, and they didn't carry the message any longer. And I looked for this spiritual message because I had a belief that it was there somewhere. For a long time I had to settle for the golden rule, and that is common to all religions, any that I've ever read about, to do unto others as you would have them do unto you. But it didn't satisfy me. And then one day I happened to be reading this thing looking for something else. I was going to get even with somebody about something, and I run across the spiritual message that Christ had brought to earth. When he was asked what is the greatest of all the commandments, he said there are two. To love your God with all your heart, all your mind, all your body, and all your soul, and love your fellow man as you love yourself. And he had given us the spiritual message. But as I say, some 1900 years ago, this message stopped being carried too well. So once again, God looked around the earth to find who could carry this message for him. And once again, he found a group of people who were the most egocentric, self-willed, self-centered, hard-headed group of people he could find anywhere in the world, a group called alcoholics. And in a blinding flash of light, he made a deal with one of them. He said, Bill, I'll tell you something. If you will carry this message of love throughout the world, you will never drink again. And for 50 years, Alcoholics Anonymous has carried this message of love one drunk to another so well and so effectively that we have risen from 2 to 1.5 million sober alcoholics in Alcoholics Anonymous today because of the message of love that one drunk can carry to another better than anyone else can carry it. And we have carried it in a world full of hate. The 10 Commandments are physical laws, and if we obey them, we will not blow ourselves off of this rock, and if we don't, we will, and we can do that tonight. I know, it can be done. They're very important, too. But now there were 12 commandments, weren't there? Like our 12 steps. How many times have you heard someone like me say to someone like you, you loved me when I could not love myself. You loved me back to health. For that, I am extremely grateful. Thank you all very much.